Okay, welcome back folks. This time we are going to do an introduction to test flying a new aircraft. So I've done this before, giving a bit of a systematic evaluation of how we approach a new aircraft, and for this one we are taking the community mod to the VL3 Evolution made by JMB, a Czech company, which is really an awesome little aeroplane. It's an ultralight powered by a Rotax 915 or 915 engine, about 100 horsepower I believe. Very cool community mod. We can see it's got this really cool racing color scheme here. So I've been flying the default model quite a bit. If you've watched some of the other videos you would have noticed that. And so this one has taken some enhancements with the performance and handling of the aircraft. So my task today is to evaluate how the airplane is operating. Now, important caveat to note is I haven't flown one of these in real life, so it seems a bit silly I'm comparing it to a previous version within the sim. So how much value I can add that any other sim pilot can't add is probably pretty limited, but I'll try to approach this in the same systematic fashion that I have done with the other video that I did in the what did we do that in? The DA20, that's right. So we'll jump in the airplane. We're pretty familiar with the how the operation of this aircraft goes now, so I don't have to spend too much time talking through the sequence of events, but we'll fire it up. Go to the right fuel tank, parking brake is set, and I've talked about the propeller control. Basically this is a dummy control. The only thing that works is this little button here, and I'm going to pre-select that to say 96% for the takeoff. Other than that, we can go ahead and crank her up. We can see the community mod. We've got some pretty cool stuff with the engine instruments are all different to what you have in the default. So we've got coolant temperature here, EGT, fuel pressure is in bar, gallons per hour, fuel quantity for each side, and we've got slightly different calibration on the manifold pressure and RPM there, so that's very cool as well. So let's crank her up. Right, away we go. Just set in a little bit of an idle there. I'll set flaps, first stage of flaps for takeoff. All the basic functionality of the airplane is exactly the same as the default version, except just for these modifications with the avionics package here. Let's see if we can go to VFR on there. We can. That's what we want. Seems to be perhaps an issue with the how do we turn that back off? Yep, with missing with I think this also has a community mod for the G1000, and we seem to be missing synthetic vision on there, unless I've just forgotten to turn it on. Maybe there is something else I needed to do there, but in any case it's not going to get cause us too much trouble today, so I'm not too bothered about that. There's the map again. I'm just flicking through a few pages here, see if there's any difference in functionality. This all looks pretty standard. We're back at NZMS Masterton for no particular reason other than I've just been flying here a bit lately. So on a flight like this, where I just want to concentrate on the airplane, I want to keep all my factors as simple as possible. So I don't want to be worried about where I am, local landmarks, airspace and stuff like this. So Masterton's a good airport because it's one I'm familiar with, and the weather's always pretty good here, and it's uncontrolled. So I've kind of got the run of the sky, and it's a place that I am comfortable with as an operator. So we want to keep as many factors in our favour as possible for a flight like this. Look how painfully slow is this. We don't seem to have the centre button where you can just push it to sync it to the heading, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. We'll go back to full. Alrighty, so we can do a quick run up here on the pad, which is a little non-standard, but it is the sim, so we sort of take some liberties where we can get away with it, and I'm not going to bother with too many. We're setting up the correct frequencies for radio calls. We'll just simulate that. So we can see coolant temperature is still quite low, which I would expect it should have come up a bit quicker than that. All temperature seems to be very high. So with a low coolant temperature, why would the oil temperature be so high? So oil pressure is in the green, which is the main thing. So as I increase the power, we'll just have to keep an eye on things to make sure that we're still staying on the parking brake. Another thing that I've noticed with this modification is I've only got 10 inches of manifold pressure. So if we look at the throttle position, you can see that's only 20% power, and RPM is already at 5,000. So that seems almost a little bit aggressive, as though you'd have a lower RPM, but I haven't flown this aircraft, so, or the Rotax, so maybe that's just right. See our coolant temperature is coming up, which is good. All temperature still seems a bit too high for my liking. We'll just take this to so see, only 15 inches manifold pressure, but already in the pretty much max RPM here. I'll push this up to 100. I just think it's such a low power setting, you would not be getting maximum RPM. So you know, but again, maybe a real pilot of the aircraft can verify if that's the case. But that would be my first comment: is the RPM I feel should just come up a little bit slower than it is. So 5700 RPM is the limitation for the Rotax engine, which is what this unit here is supposed to do, and that's also why I have buttoned that back to 96, so that it just keeps us below. And 5500 RPM is our max continuous thrust there. What?
Okay to stay here, what do you want to do?
Do I look like I'm going anywhere?
Just making sure.
No, yes, I'm not going. Yep.
I don't see, so you're coming here too.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so we'll just bring it up to 15 inches. She's starting to rock around a fair bit on the nose oleo there. Very sensitive, actually, this manifold pressure. It's got a big range. I think at full power you're at something like 45 inches of manifold pressure, so the engine instrument indications are just absolutely wild in this Rotax engine. Massive range of manifold pressure and a really fast RPM, so it's so different to a Lycoming or a Continental engine, which you find on sort of typical light recreational aircraft. No change at all moving either of those mags. Not even a sausage there. Is that a slight sausage with the RPM? Okay, maybe it seems so. We're at 55.78. Goes back. Don't know. There seems to be a very limited RPM change, very abrupt. But yeah, so that might not be correctly modelled. Alright, coolant temperature's up in the green. All temperature's still high, but it's just sitting there pretty steady, so happy with that. Let's do some pre-takeoff checks. The trim is set. Did I just bump that? Let's go back to the right tank. Just going to go slightly nose down. Trim set, throttle friction that we don't have, mixture we don't have, but we're on the right tank. Flaps set at 15 for takeoff. Ignitions on both instruments checked. We've discussed all those to death. Hatch snout secure, and controls full, free and correct. Find my rudder pedals here. There they go. I'm sitting on a chair on a hard floor, and the chair has wheels, and every time I push on a pedal, I feel like my chair is going to slide backwards, because every action has an equal and opposite reaction, which is actually not ideal for trying to fly an aeroplane. You do not want to push the controls and find yourself moving away from them, but unfortunately it is what it is, so we just have to make do. In the world of sim flying, going to turn on track IR. Ouch. And pop the height up a bit. Alright, that looks good. Mustard in traffic, Delta Mike Oscar is taxiing to line at runway 24. Okay, I'm just going to put backup battery, fuel pump, strobe on. Parking brake is released. Away we go. Brakes are checked. So I thought the handling of the default aircraft was really nice. It was pretty smooth, cruised about 130 knots. Approach set is checked, and I enjoyed flying it. I understand that this has had some performance tweaks to bring it up to a 915 spec for the Rotax, and it's probably going to be a little sportier. So we shall see how she handles. An aeroplane like this would have similar characteristics to a Lancia 360 or some of the smaller Glaciers, and possibly even one of the high-performing RVs. I've flown a Harman rocket before, which was just an amazing aeroplane with a much more powerful engine. That's a 300 horsepower Lycoming AEI of 540, I think it is, and that thing really is a rocket ship. So this shouldn't have quite the same performance, but maybe similar in handling with this very smooth laminar wing. So away we go. Landing light goes on. If I stop talking, it's because I'm working too hard, so I'll try and talk you through it. we're just going to smoothly increase the power. We've got a slight crosswind from right to left, we can see on the windsock there. Okay, there's full power, 50 inches, unbelievable, 60 knots. Okay, I'm going to rotate a bit there. Taking a bit of time to rotate. Oh, brutal. Okay, touch the brakes, gear travels. I set climb. Just going to bring that manifold pressure back to the top of the green, which seems to be 45 inches, so we'll just go for that, and we've got just over 5500 RPM, which I'm happy with. So it's accelerating in the climb here at about 1300 feet a minute. So already we're at pretty much the cruise speed of the previous model in the climb, so I can definitely feel the performance is better than it was in the other one. Let's go flaps up. Okay, we get that nose down pitch moment, which was the same as the other aircraft, and yeah, quite a bit of drag with those flaps because the speed is just racing away there. We're still climbing 500 feet a minute. Clear to the right. Going to start a left-hand turn. Bit of turbulence about, and we're going to start a more aggressive climb to reduce the speed. So yeah, this is definitely a bit of a rocket ship. 2,000 feet a minute there. Going to have to keep that speed below the yellow arc with that turbulence. So I'm going to bring the manifold pressure back to 40 inches and just tweak the RPM back to 5,500. Okay, that's good. So it goes into the green, so that's nicely modelled. Feels a bit more unstable, I have to say. See if we can get rid of this. There we go. Let's go for a bit of nose up trim. I'll leave it at 3,000 feet initially, and we'll just do some general handling, some turns, medium and then steep turns, and then we will move into a stall series. Just going to keep the speed below the yellow arc there, so bringing the power back 35 inches, see if that's enough as we level off here. There's not much inertia. Trim is pretty effective, in fact it's very effective. Okay, so still accelerating into 160 knots. So I'll reduce the power to 30 inches and see if that gives us a steady speed here. Decelerating a touch. Okay, we'll start a turn around to the right. This turbulence is not helping, so I just want to keep away from the terrain if I can. Try and find some smooth air. It's a 30-degree medium turn. Seems to be some stuttering. Okay, so at 30 inches we've seen a speed reduction is somewhere between 140 and 150 knots. So that's a very, very low power cruise. Seems to be a headwind coming from the southwest. Smoother out here. The airport is back in that direction. Okay, so she's pretty stable. I've noticed the roll is it's quite a very responsive. So it feels not quite as sprightly as the extra or the pits, but it definitely has a crisper roll than the original version. But you can still fly it pretty smoothly. Makes quite a lot of noise when you roll like this. So it's like there's a bucket of bolts rattling around in the airframe somewhere, which is a bit disconcerting. I think it just makes a bit too much creaking and groaning in a turn. For a really strong carbon fibre type aircraft like this, the semi-monocoque fuselage construction, I wouldn't expect it to make quite that much racket in the turns. It should be a lot smoother. But that's really just a sound modelling issue, which has probably not been touched by the developers of this mod anyway. Right, I'm going to start reducing the power now in preparation for a stall series, so we'll just come back to 20 inches. And I've just let go of the stick, so we get quite a pronounced nose down pitch moment as we reduce the power, which is what we would expect. All clear, we'll bring it back around towards the north. And I'm just going to apply a bit of G in a steep turn here to A, get the speed coming back, and B, see how it feels. Very responsive. Okay. We'll just settle it back to 3,000 feet. So the first stall we'll just do with the gear down, so gear travels and the wings clean. Okay, so power's idle. I'm at 3,050 feet, levelling at 3,000 feet. Now we just really try and keep it straight all the way through. We'll listen for the stall warning, and then I'll actually take it all the way through to the stall. 70 knots. I've got almost full back stick now, 60 knots. Okay, stall warning, it's 55. No angle of attack indicator. Okay, I've got full back stick, speed's decreasing, increasing. Okay, so holding full back stick really, she's just wallowing there. Now the nose is dropping, and as soon as it gets a little bit of airspeed, it gets a bit of lift and it just porpoises back up. So we could use our feet to keep it straight, but other than that, it's not really stalling, it's just wallowing around there at around 55 knots, so that's interesting. So the aircraft is not really even stalling, so I'll recover from that, release the back pressure, increase the power. And we don't need a whole bunch of power, so we'll just go to say 30 inches and make our way back up to 3,000 feet. I'll reverse the turn, I'll keep the gear out, and we're still climbing 100 knots with 1,000 feet a minute with the gear out and only 30 inches of manifold pressure, so it's obviously a very high performing aircraft. Let's see how it feels with a notch of flaps. So there's flaps 15. We get that big balloon initially, the speed is decreasing, so we're getting obviously some drag from the flaps. I'm just going to use that road there as a reference point for the next stall. Still climbing nicely at 80 knots. Coming back to 3,000 feet. Okay, there's flaps 38, and we'll level at 3,000, reducing the power back to idle. Very pitchy. Seems to be a little more unstable in the pitch than it was before. And flaps 55. Okay, I've got pretty much full back stick there. Stall warning came in at about 45, 40 knots. Okay, we get a lot more sink this time. It's directionally unstable, wants to depart to the left. So now we've got quite a pronounced rate of descent, but no nose down pitch moment. So we're pretty much just going down like an elevator, and the rate of descent is increasing as well, 1,100 feet a minute. Okay, so yeah, I think it would just sit here all the way to the ground. So let's recover. I'll just go to flaps 15 again, 30 inches of manifold pressure. Knots. Okay, and this time we'll just keep our climb coming back up to 3,000 feet, and I will leave the power on and increase the flaps, and we'll just see about stalling with the power on this time, see if we can actually get a proper stall. So far the aircraft doesn't really depart, it just maintains this high nose attitude, very low speed, high sink rate, which is pretty good, you know, for a wing like this. It surprises me that it doesn't have a brake on the stall. It is obviously quite a wide wing, so I think it just maintains a lot of lift even at slow speed. Okay, there's 2,800 feet. So at 29, I'm just going to pop down the flaps 38, that'll bump us up to 3,000 feet, and leave, we'll start with 30 inches of manifold pressure, and the speed's increasing, so we definitely wouldn't be able to stall the aircraft at this power setting. So come back to 20 inches and see if that's going to work. Still climbing. (3,100 feet). So we'll try and maintain that altitude. So at 19 inches, there's no sign of anything. It's just sitting here at 60 knots. This would be pretty hard on the engine. I mean, the engine temperatures are pretty stable, but I'd expect that in the real aircraft the temperatures would be increasing quite a bit with such a low airflow over the radiator. Okay, let's come back to 15 inches and see if that will set us up for a power on stall. No, just still sitting there. Okay, let's try 10 inches. Okay, it feels a bit more like it. So pretty hard to do a power on stall here. All I can really do is reduce the power to get it towards the stall, and then increase power to once we are nearing the stall. And I say stall, but as we can see, the aircraft's not really stalling, it's just sort of mushing out with a high angle of attack and an increasing rate of descent. Okay, so that's just under 10 inches of manifold pressure. We're back at 50 knots. Got a bit of a rate of descent, but no stall warning. Okay, so all I can do is really just aggressively increase power and go full aft stick and see what happens. Okay, so we'll do that now. So we'll go to, say, 15 inches and full aft stick. Still pitching, that's 30 degrees. Almost stops. Okay, we've finally actually got a break of the stall. So recovering, flaps to 15, flaps up, gear travels. Okay. Yeah, so it's pretty hard to get this thing to stall. I really had to haul it into the stall with full aft stick, quite a bit of power on to actually get a brake, and it recovered pretty much straight away. So that was full flap and landing gear. So yeah, I think this has pretty docile stall characteristics. You really have to get it into it, and I think in some ways, while that's obviously a good safety feature of the aeroplane, one thing to keep in mind with that sort of characteristic is you could find yourself with quite a high rate of descent and not really be aware of it, particularly if you're operating in instrument conditions, which I'm not sure if this aircraft is certified for that, but with all this fancy gadgetry, I'd imagine you could fly this IFR pretty comfortably. So the stall series is complete. I think I haven't changed my opinion too much on the approach speed. Somewhere around 90 knots is pretty good. It gives you good visibility and plenty of control authority as well. So let's just open the throttle and see how this thing goes. So we'll take her up to 40 inches, 45, sorry, and power seems to be sitting just under 5,500 RPM, which I'm happy with. Needing quite a bit of nose down trim, and we can see V and E. That's the velocity never exceed the maximum speed is 183 knots. And if I can level her out, she just wants to climb. I think she's got a pretty good chance of making it in level flight at 3,000 feet, which is impressive. Yeah, so it's much faster than the default aircraft. So essentially at full power, she's just sitting under V and E. Okay, good. I will bring it back to 35 inches, and we'll just start a turn around to the right here and make our way back to Masterton, and we'll do a touch and go and then back for a full stop landing. There's a steep turn. So So 35 inches, speed is staying pretty steady there. I've still got a slight climb on there. As I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, one of the most difficult aspects of flying the aircraft in the sim like this is finding the right attitude for level flight in turns. Just have to correct the trim from the change in the speed. So that just takes quite a bit of time to get that picture right. Yeah, I don't like all the creaking and groaning when you turn. I think that just makes the aeroplane feel more unstable than it is. So we could get rid of that. But otherwise, she handles pretty well. Very sporty. Yeah, I think if you had been flying the default model in the sim and then jumped in this wee fellow with the modifications, you'd be in for a bit of a surprise. So an aeroplane like this, because it goes so quick, it really changes things. You have to think quite a lot further ahead of the aircraft. There's a big difference between flying along at 160 or 170 knots as there is at 120 or 130. So you really do need to take this into account when operating an aircraft with this sort of performance in terms of descent planning. How do you join the circuit? You know, do you come screaming into the circuit with other aircraft that are doing 120 knots or 100 knots, and you come blasting it at 160 and start chewing everyone up? That's it's not a good place to be. So slowing it down is going to be a real challenge. So you need to plan to be at circuit altitude nice and early, so you've got a good level flight segment where you can just close the throttle and start to configure. So with gear and flaps, get a bit of drag out, and that'll help you to slow down. So we'll demonstrate that here. So the airport should be just up ahead of me on the nose somewhere. So we'll join a downwind for runway 24. So we'll just make our way down to 1,000 feet. Sorry, 1,300 feet is the circuit altitude. And then we'll start to reduce the power. Okay, so we're just coming up on that now, so we're levelling off. Okay, the runway's just on the nose, so we'll just start to turn into downwind. And the speed's decreasing, so 24 inches, we've got a good deceleration there, so that's working out pretty well. Come back to 20 inches. Need quite a bit of nose up trim. So we're downwind, 130 knots. So gear limiting speed according to the placard there is 81 knots. So you really got to get it pretty slow. So we have to reduce the power quite substantially. Coming up mid downwind. Okay, let's go flaps 15, that should get us started. Okay, pretty much idle power there to try and get down to get the gear out. Let's travel the gear. Flaps 38. And just see how she feels on an approach. So we'll start the descent. Turning base. Quite high here. I'm looking for 90 knots. Still pretty high. It's holding 80 knots, so there's quite a bit of drag in those flaps. Go full flap. Yeah, definitely a lot of drag. See the speed's back at 70 now with this rate of descent. So I'm probably going to need a fair bit of power actually to maintain the speed on final. So I was thinking 90 knots, but it's actually flying really nicely at 70, so it's quite amazing to have an aeroplane with such a large speed range. It can stall at 40 knots or less and cruise at 170. That's really impressive. So 70 knots is a nice approach speed, just like a 172. So flyers approach speeds are like a Cessna, cruise speeds are like a turboprop. 60 knots. It's pretty twitchy, low to the ground. Power's to idle, holding it off. Okay, back to flaps 15. Keep it straight without pushing my chair too far back from the desk. And let's crank her up again. It's full power. Okay, there's a slightly cleaner takeoff than the last one. Brakes, gear travels. Bring it back to 40 inches for the circuit initially. Flaps up. Yeah, big nose down pitch moment with that final stage of flaps. Okay, clear to the right. Reduce power back to 30 inches here for the circuit. Amazing rate of climb, we're at 1700 feet a minute there. Okay, to circuit altitude, so I'll come back to 25 inches. Crosswind at 1000 feet. You see the aircraft really wants to accelerate now, so we'll bring the power right back just to try and keep it under about 130 knots. Clear to the right. Start the downwind turn. Very responsive, nicely harmonised controls. Quite a long way out because it's so fast, so it's quite a wide circuit. Airplane like this, you could pretty much fly straight into a downwind without actually doing the crosswind leg. So I'm just on a slightly convergent heading here so we can reduce our spacing. So rather than doing 060, you can see I've just got 045 or so. Okay, reduce the power a bit now to start configuring. Hold the nose up. Flaps 15 should get the nose down pitch moment there. Adjust the attitude, that's getting the speed going, so that's nice. 90 knots. Travelling the gear. Nose and mains. Okay, gears down 3 greens. Just increasing the power there for about 80 knots. Start our turn in with a descent. Just going to wait until final to put out full flap this time. Okay, flaps 38. Back to 10 inches. .70 knots. Yeah, a lot of drag in these flaps, so you do need to make quite a steep approach. Yeah, it's a lot draggier than the previous version, I must say. Not a very straight final. Going to flaps 55. Yeah, 55 is nice. It doesn't seem to add a whole lot of drag, but it just gives you a slightly nicer pitch attitude on final here, but nose low, so you get good visibility. 60 knots feels a bit slow. Rate of descent's quite high. Okay, reducing power now. Yeah, this feels just a bit slow. That one was a bit firmer. So I do think probably 80 knots with a longer final would be a more comfortable speed. But anyway, we'll call it a day there. I like it. It's definitely quite a lot different to the default version. The default version I actually still quite like because it's nice and placid. It doesn't go too fast. It's nice and comfortable to fly, and there's not as much drag on final. This aeroplane is definitely a lot more vibrant, and it's a little more aggressive feeling. Obviously it's got a big speed range, which you do have to manage, I think, if you're doing cross-country flights in the aeroplane. But overall it probably feels a little closer to what I'd expect a real aircraft to fly like in terms of its performance, aside from just a couple of minor inconsistencies or things which I think would be different with the engine instruments there, like coolant temperature, and oil temperature should increase at slow speed as well. Very docile stall. I did watch a couple of YouTube videos prior to doing this to try and educate myself a bit, and I did see a video showing some stalling, and the aircraft did have that nose porpoising moment, so I think that's pretty well modelled. So all in all, I think the guys are doing an awesome job, and yeah, well, she just crashed, but other than that, it's a good aeroplane, so I highly recommend it. I think this is going to only go from strength to strength.